Hey everyone, and welcome to the video. Today I'm going to try and do something different. I typically am a streamer over at Twitch, but I wanted to start making some YouTube content, and I figured why not use all of the hand histories that I typically go over off stream and then just record myself doing it. So these are going to be a collection of hands that I played for today's session that I marked for review. So these are typically going to be spots that I'm not entirely sure of myself. And then I'm also going to look at some of the top hands that I made big mistakes in. And I'm going to do that using GTO Wizard, which is the software that I use to analyze all of my play. So let's just jump right into it, should we? Let me open up GTO Wizard. And I'll get to those hands in a second. Okay, so I uploaded my hands after today's session. It's March 15th. So you can see here that these are the uploaded hands. And it looks like I played 97.1% correct, which is a great overall correct score. The problem is my average EV loss is rather high, and I'll show you guys exactly why that is. Taking a look at my biggest EV losses. So these are going to be hands that I made a blunder in, where the decision I made was not the optimal one according to GTO Wizard. And the EV loss is the deviation from the optimal play, how much EV we lost in big blinds. So this is a pretty large one here. The first one we can see, it's 24.95. I'm going to go over this hand right now. What happened was cutoff opened. We were in the button with pocket twos. As you can see, we can mix a call here. So typically I am following GTO Wizard's pre-flop solutions. I use the general 500 if you guys wanted to also mimic what I'm doing to follow along or something like that. But that's what I'm using for this game. So once cutoff opens, I'm going to mix a call and fold with twos. I end up calling, and then we get squeezed by the small blinds. I wasn't sure if I was going to pure call or not, so just seeing that this is a mix, in fact, is good. I thought maybe because we were rolling for the call versus the initial cutoff raise that this would be a pure call versus a squeeze, since we have it so infrequently and it's nice to have some small pocket pairs like this. But it looks like we are still going to mix a fold. So if I look at our range for getting squeezed, not something I'm too familiar with, to be honest. But I do know that whenever you get squeezed, typically you're going to mix a lot of your pocket pairs as a heuristic. So looking at the button, I think that looks true. You can see here that eights all the way down to twos are just going to basically be mixing about a third of the time. And then it's not until you get to pocket nines plus that you have a high frequency call. And of course, you also have some of these other combos like ace five, king six, which are a bit weaker. And then you have your stronger Broadway suited combos and your offsuit ace queen. But this is going to be your range, right? We're not going to raise after getting squeezed. Yeah, we're mostly just going to continue with a call. So obviously we lack the top part of our range, like kings, queens, aces, ace, king suited, ace, queen suited. But we do have to defend some hands versus the squeeze, and we're going to mix here a third of the time. So I call jack 8-7. Now this is typically a board that actually hits our range really well. Taking a look again at our calling range, we have a lot of this section right here, which interacts with this jack 8-7 flop very well. We also have a lot of gut shots and top pairs with the ace jack and the king jack, the king 10. So a lot of our hands are actually hitting this board texture, and you can kind of see more clear versus the 20% sizing that we're hardly ever folding versus this bet. And that's just because our entire range just really does well on this jack 8-7 board. In fact, it could even be the case that we have an advantage. Let me take a look. Not quite an advantage, but You can see here the best hands compared to the best hands from the button and the small blind. We have 7.3% best hands versus 11.8% best hands from the small blind. And the small blind's also going to have an equity favorite over us. So I guess their range is actually going to be stronger on Jack 8-7. Maybe if the Jack was something like a 6, that would shift things significantly. So I would start playing around with, like, you know, the flop and see what board textures are good for the button. Regardless, we still have a lot of good hands in our range. And that's, you know, you can see that right here. So we're going to be continuing a lot of the time. Deuces is one that doesn't really look like it would be a great call, but in fact, yeah, this is going to play as a call. Villain's still going to have a lot of 2 Broadway cards that don't have a made hand yet. Hands like King Queen, Ace Queen, Queen 10, all these combos. And then you even have some like Ace 5, Ace 6 suited, all those different suited aces combos. So floating once here versus small sizing is good. And then once small blind checks on the turn, which is what they do, I decide I'm going to turn my hand into somewhat of a semi-bluff. Again, this turn is really good for us. We just have a lot of really strong hands. Twos has a hard time getting to showdown. A lot of overcards can come on the river. Villain could have, you know, some... Villain could basically bluff us off our hand by the river if we check back. So at some frequency, you see the solver putting in a small bet here. So I end up putting in the small bet as well. And villain calls, river is a 7. Now this is where things get a little wonky, and villain checks. And I wasn't really thinking fully about what hands I was trying to get to fold against the small blind, because if I really thought about it for a minute, villain can still have some ace highs, perhaps even some like, I don't know, king, queen, queen X of diamonds that they check float out of position, which twos would end up winning at showdown. And so, yeah, I think this was a mistake to turn this particular hand into a bluff. And you can see this is where that big EV difference comes from. I end up shoving all in, and that's just a big blunder. Now, I was looking earlier at what hands I should be doing this with, and it makes a lot of sense that we would not use deuces because we have much better hands in the line of something like Queen 10. Not Queen 10, King 10. We can take a look here at the all-in size. King 10, King Queen, King 9. So a lot of these combos that are blocking the villain's check calling range. Pocket 2s does not block any value. And when you typically want to bluff all in on the river, you want to have some kind of blocker to the villain's calling range. And deuces obviously is just not going to have any part of the villain's calling range. However, something like King 9 is a great hand to bluff with because that's going to block some of the villain's pocket kings, King Jack suited perhaps, 9-10 if they slow played that. Pocket 9s might even check call at some frequency, Jack 9. So this does bluff a lot of those kind of combos, block a lot of those combos that are calling, which means villain's going to have to fold a lot of the unmade hands like ace high, which we're also losing to with king 9. And remember I said pocket 2s is actually beating a lot of the ace king and ace queen here on the river. So it really doesn't make sense to bluff if the villain is going to fold these ace highs and only call better hands. But if we're bluffing something like king 9, then we have the ability to get villain to fold better hands like ace high. And we also block their calling range, which is going to consist of hands like Jack 9, Pocket Kings, 9-9, 9-8 suited. A lot of these good hands that villain's going to call, 10-9, right? So those are the kind of combos that we want to be bluffing. So for example, another good hand might be King Queen because we're blocking Queen Jack suited, we're blocking Queen Queen, we're blocking King King. So you can tell here just by highlighting the call range from the button what hands the small blind is likely to want to bluff or what kind of cards should be in your hand to bluff with. And then that's going to be very well reflected in the all-in range here with all of the weaker hands. You can also filter for the trash hands here, and you can see the trash hands are going to mostly be these high card combos that have some kind of blocker effect on either, a pair or even just losing to ace high. We want that to fold. So, bad selection of a bluff here. That was my first mistake. Let's look at the next hands. Pocket jacks, we go for a 3-bet from the small blind versus a button open. And button calls, flop ace 10-7. This is a flop that I think we're going to be continuing with most of our range. It's a really good flop for the small blinds range. And typically, if you have a flop that's really good for a tighter linear range, you're going to bet a lot of the time with the small sizing as a good heuristic, and you can see that's true here. This is our strategy out of the small blind versus the button call in a 3-bet pot, and you can see we have a 20% sizing. We also have a 75% sizing with a more polar side of our range. But mostly we're going to use this smaller bet size of 20 or 33 with a big part of our range, and then have this small frequency of 75 with a more polar part of a range, maybe some hands that have more equity like straight draws or backdoor flush draws, and then really strong hands like ace king or ace queen. Those are going to be really good for us to, bet on the larger side to get all of our money in, get value from some of the weaker hands, etc., etc. So this particular hand, if we were going to bet, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to go for the polar size because this is a medium strength hand. Typically, you want to be betting the polar size with the best hands in your range or the weak hands in your range that have a lot of equity. This is neither of those. This is going to be square in our good hand range. So if you take a look at the small blind here and you filter for good hands, you will see pocket jacks pops up, and a lot of our good range is going to be using the 20 and 33% sizing. Not too many hands are going to be using this 75% sizing. If you wanted to see what the best hands are using, you can click that, and then you'll, like I said before, you're going to see a lot more 75% sizing being used now, because those are the ones that want to be using the large sizing, the best hands in your range. Okay. So we bet, then turn comes. I elect to check. We could also bet small as somewhat of a block bet, control the pot type deal. We can still get value from 10x if villain has something like queen 10, 9, 10, king 10. If villain has something like pocket 9s, pocket 8s, etc. We still have some small value, but for the most part, the solver is going to want to check here, which is what I do. It goes check, check, and then on the river, I check. And villain does something very unorthodox. They go for a big overbet. I wasn't really expecting this. I'm not sure if the solver wants to use an overbet after this line. Let's take a look. So on the river, I go for the check. Button can in fact overbet here or go all in. I think all in is more intuitive to me rather than the overbet. But let's see what kind of combos they're going to be overbetting here or going all in with. So they're going to have some bluffs, of course. They're going to have hands like Jack 9, which just don't even have a pair by the river. 8-7, which is going to have a pair of 7s. Pocket 8s, not really looking to show that down either. Yeah, a lot of really weak hands. Some under pairs even are going for the all-in or the large bet. And so the best hands are going to come from, I assume, flushes, things like king jack suited, king 10 suited, jack 10 suited, jack 9 suited. So we're seeing a lot of this jack of diamonds in the value range, which means we have a good hand to bluff catch with, because we're blocking all of those good hands and we're unblocking all of the trash hands that you can see here. Even, I guess, pair of jacks does block some weak jack 9, but unblocking all of these combos down here. So I actually elected to go all in because I thought using my blocker and turning my hand into a bluff would be a good idea, just in case villain was betting something like pocket queens or queen X as a bluff. I wasn't really sure, so I ended up going all in. But the solver really rather just call, because if villain is bluffing correctly, they're going to have a bunch of these hands here that's we're ahead of, and again we're blocking those really strong hands that they have. So I ended up going all in. Villain ended up folding. And that was that. By the way, in the deuces hand, if you were curious what the guy ended up having, they called on the river after I shoved, and they showed up with queens, which is another good reason why we need to be blocking pocket queens, not blocking nothing with these pocket deuces. Let's go over another hand here. Okay, so this one was actually a really interesting hand. This gets into the minutia of using blockers. And I think it's something that may not be intuitive. I got it wrong. So I know it's going to definitely get some people tripped up, but let's go over it. Ace 10 offsuit, we defend out of the big blind versus the hijack. Flop comes Jack 8 2, we're out of position in the big blind when we check. Hijack goes for a small size, which is fairly standard, and we have an option between calling and raising. So this might be surprising to some players, but you are going to continue. The Ace of Clubs is a really good card on this texture. And then the 10 of Spades is also a very relevant card because it allows us to make backdoor straights. We're also blocking some stronger hands in villain's range like Jack 10, 10, 10. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Jack 10 and 10 10 are the really two decent hands in their range that we're blocking, but the Ace of Clubs is more important here anyway because this is the card that's going to be able to barrel a lot of club turns. We're blocking aces, we're blocking Ace Jack. It's a very strong card to have in our range. So the solver does elect to turn it into a semi-bluff here. So that we also have some bluffs on a club turn. It's really important that you think about two streets in advance when you're starting to check raise on the flop. What cards are you going to barrel the turn with? What cards are good for you on the turn? What cards are bad for you on the turn? What part of your range wants to keep betting on the turn, etc., etc. So this hand, I think, is manufactured as a raise because it has some really good turns for it. So if a club comes on the turn, or if a 9 comes on a turn, or maybe an ace, we could think about betting. I probably wouldn't there with that ace, but that's a good card for us at least. So this is a hand that I am happily going to check raise. And when we do turn this club, my plan was to bluff and barrel off here. And you can see here the solver agrees. We use the large sizing. So this is good. And then on the river, the King of Hearts comes off, which is a very weird card because it's going to interact with a decent part of Hijack's range for continuing to the river. Just having strong hands under the Hijack here is going to interact with the King naturally. So hands like Ace King, King King, Jack King suited, etc. And you can see here that I ended up going all in, which was the most polarized thing you could do by the river. But because we had the nut blocker, I decided I was going to either all in or check, and I ended up going all in. However, the solver doesn't like this. It wants me to pure check, which is a little surprising to me since I thought this was going to be such a good bluff candidate. But if we dive deeper, this is where the minutia and the tough part comes from picking your combos as bluffs. So when you're defending the big blind versus the hijack initially, you can see that we have a lot of these offsuit aces on the left side here. My head might be blocking some of them. Let me move right over there. So you can see, yeah, we have a lot of these offsuit aces, and some of these offsuit aces include the ace of clubs like we had, but also a pair. So something like ace 8 offsuit, ace 5 offsuit. Those are pretty good combos to block villains' really strong hands by the river. So if we take a look again at the river, we will see that the combos that want to be bluffing the river are going to be those initial offsuit aces here. Oh, I'm blocking it again. Sorry. There we go. Okay. The offsuit aces again that have a pair with the offsuit ace. So ace of clubs, 5 of spades is a great hand to bluff with because villain can float the flop with pocket 5s. So we're also blocking the 5-5 combos that villain has for calling the river if we're going to shove the river. Also something like, I don't think we have too many other ones that we're blocking. Let's see. Um, so if we go to the hijack, we'll see, okay, fives is not in the range, so I am wrong there. The five might just be a better unblocker. That might be what is happening here. So I'm kind of reviewing this with you guys. You know, I'm not trying to lecture you on exactly what the things are. I'm also learning myself while I'm doing these videos, which is the whole point of them, right? That we both learn, we both figure things out together. So yeah, so the reason I guess we are using these weaker offsuit aces is the ace 10, the 10 of spades or the 10 of hearts or whatever card we had on the side might be a bad card to have because we're blocking their folds with those cards, and then we're unblocking the folds with the ace 5, the ace 4, the ace 3, the ace 6, and the ace 7, and the ace 8. So I think that's what's happening here, because if we shove here and we see what the hijack call range is, we can see that a lot of their call range is going to be, oops, there we go. We can see a lot of their call range is going to be the nuts, suited aces, of course, which is why blocking the ace of clubs is so good. But then we can also see what the fold range is, and a lot of their folds are going to be 10-10, Jack 10. So it looks like we're blocking a lot of these, you know, middling cards, Queen 10. But then you think about all of those low cards, and it doesn't look like any of these combos here are significant in blocking folds. Rather, they're only blocking calls. So that's really good for why we would be using the. No, that's a good reason why we would be using the low wheel card combos with the ace rather than the high card in our hand. Again, this is very like detailed, you know, blocker effects, but it is really important because, again, thinking about the hands you're going to block that are folding is bad. You want to be blocking value and not blocking the folds at the same time, if ideal. And so because we have a lot of the ace of clubs in our range, it seems like the villain, or sorry, the hero wants to be bluffing a select number of the ace of clubs combos. So we're also, of course, shoving the strong suited aces in our range. This is a very nuts or air scenario, which is pretty cool because you don't see too many of these in practice, but this is one of them here. So yeah, so I guess the ace 10 was a bad hand to call to have in our range, and we end up getting called by king jack with the king of clubs, which I think is probably a fine call. Let's see, king jack offsuit with the king of clubs. Yeah, even that hand wants to mix some folds, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, they thought about it for a while in game and ended up calling. So yeah, close spot. Unlucky that we ran into some part of their calling range. All right, what's the next hand? Um, let's go over one more. Yeah, this is another interesting one. 8-7 suited. I open the cutoff at 100% frequency. The small blind raises, and we mix a call. This isn't going to be a pure call, but I did end up calling in this scenario. King 10-6 flop. Villain bets a small sizing, which is probably good because a lot of their range wants to bet on this flop. I continue here with my gut shot and backdoor flush draw. Then the turn comes a 7, and villain checks. Now, my first thought was, okay, I'm going to start bluffing this, but for some reason I decided to check back. But yeah, I guess the solver wants to mix a bluff and a check back at a very small frequency. But for the most part, this is not a bad spot to start bluffing. We're definitely at the bottom of our range for getting to the turn. A lot of our floats are going to have flushes, and it's important that we're blocking something, you know, that we can bet here. And it looks like we can be blocking 9-8 suited at some frequency. Let's take a look. Let's first see why the solver wants to use 8-7. So the small blind is going to check a lot on this turn, and it doesn't look like they have 9-8. It does look like they have some 7-7 though, so that could be a big factor as to why we're going to turn 8-7 into a bluff. They also have 8-8, which they're probably going to check fold anyway. I don't know. But let's look at the bet scenario. So if they check, we can bet 33. So we'd bet 33. And the continuing range here is, it is pocket eights. There is some frequency of raising with pocket eights, in fact. Pretty interesting. But 7-7 is going to be the main hand, I think, that we're blocking for value. And then again, we're kind of unblocking some folds like Jack 10. So if we can get Jack 10 to fold, that's great. If we can get something like, what else can fold here that we're ahead of, or that we're behind? Pocket jacks, pocket queens, that would be good to fold. So yeah, I can see why we would bet the turn. And then if villain does call and the river comes off the king of diamonds, which is what happened in game, am I going to bluff here? I think the solver is going to want to check, looking at 8-7 suited. Yeah, so we're not going to necessarily double barrel this, but we are going to bet twice, or bet once, I guess, after floating. And yeah, so this is a good candidate to bet, but not jam the river, because once we get to the river, if we were to think about jamming, I think that we want to be bluffing a lot of king X's. Let's take a look. Let's see. So if we go all in, then the small blind wants to check call with king X, Jack 10, so hearts, Queen 10 hearts. So ideally, maybe we have some kind of heart blocker, or what else would we want to maybe bluff here? King Queen at a frequency. But I think having a heart blocker would be the most ideal for bluffing. Let's see what the solver wants to use as a bluff. So we can see here, the solver wants to use something like 7-6. Okay, that's interesting. So blocking the boats in villain's range. 6-5 also blocking boats. Does villain ever have king 6 in this scenario? Very small frequency, so that is relative to our bluff, or to our to our bluff there. But they will have 7s. The 6s, not so much. I think just blocking 7s. And then also sometimes you just see the solver use the bottom of the range because they don't have any good blockers in a scenario, right? So highlighting the trash hands again. Sometimes we're just going to bluff 2s and 3s and 4s with a heart. And I don't think that's going to really block anything, really. But it is going to unblock the folds of villain. So like pocket queens, pocket jacks, king jack, aces, etc. So the solver is electing to use a more kind of toy game-ish approach to a polarized range here, where we have, just weak hands, and it's not as concerned with blockers in this scenario. Again, it's really hard to have relevant blockers without having the hand yourself, right? Like you can't really have a 10 of hearts without having some other equity or showdown value. Same thing with a queen of hearts. It's really hard to have just a bare queen of hearts. But if you see here, if we do have the queen of hearts with the ace queen, we actually turn that into the bluff too. So it makes a lot of sense here to, bluff the ace queen. And then the 7-6 is relevant to the boats that it's blocking and unblocks the folds. So that's why we see a lot of these bluffs from these hands. All right, that's going to wrap it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's just a test, and if you do enjoy it, please leave a comment, like and subscribe, and let me know if I should continue making these in the future. Next time, I'm going to look at some hands that I marked for review instead of just my highest EV losses. All right, guys. Till next time, peace.